Welcome to Great Habits, Part 1. How to build your habits good and strong, the pre-lesson. We all love success, don't we? This is how we open the boot camp as well, and I feel like it bears repeating. Success is something that we have tried to choose for ourselves. That's why you're here. You want to have success. And the only way, unfortunately, to have success is to go through failure and out the other side. Because if you had already had success, you wouldn't be here. Now, the early lessons in this class, the written lessons, if you've read them, they talk about how success is not just the opposite of failure, and it's not. But to understand success and to create success, we have to understand failure and, as I said, go through it. So when we think of failure, have you ever noticed that we look at it as one big story arc? Someone starts something, and then they fail. Now, why do they fail? There's always a variety of explanations, from execution, wrong idea, there were a lot of competitors, they couldn't compete, or the market was resistant, didn't want to change, things like that. My personal favorite in the startup world is didn't want it badly enough. So we have this big story arc, and we have to ask, does didn't want it bad enough, or do competitors really explain how you get from start to fail? If you ask me, it sounds a little bit like that South Park episode with the underpants gnomes. If you haven't seen it, or you haven't seen it in a while, they're underpants gnomes, and their business plan is to 1, collect underpants, 2, question, 3, profit. In other words, underpants gnomes are definitely a startup. Now, these explanations, they're what I would call, the word facile is defined as appearing neat and comprehensive only by ignoring the true complexities of an issue. Superficial. In other words, wrong idea, competitors, or on the flip side, explaining success, hard work, or working 12 hours a day, or the right idea, or the right execution. Real explanations of success or failure are specific. You can't take the same explanation and apply it to every other situation. For example, hard work. Any single successful person in the entire world could say, what's the secret of my success? Hard work. And it wouldn't give you anything useful, because it also wouldn't be actionable. Real explanations of success or failure are actionable. Finally, have to have a way to find out if it's true. Can you test whether hard work is the criteria for success or failure? Absolutely. Because you can see that there are many people who work very, very hard and do not succeed. And there are many people who do not work very hard and do succeed. Therefore, hard work is not a good explanation. It's not a real explanation, because you can test it and find that it's false. Same goes for these guys. Poor execution, wrong idea, competitors, the market. Are they testable? What does that mean exactly? How exactly did one cause that outcome? What evidence is there that hard work or the wrong idea actually created that outcome? By what mechanism and what proof? How can you take that problem and overcome it? Or in the case of success, how can you achieve it? In the case of failure, how can you avoid it then? How can you know if you're doing it right or wrong? And what specific actions can you take right now? If you cannot answer these questions, if no one can answer these questions regarding an explanation of failure or success, it's not useful. Didn't want it badly enough fails the test. The reality of failure is that we don't have a nice, clean story arc. Start, simple explanation, fail. In fact, every failure is made up of piles and piles of tiny failures every day. What I call micro fails. Macro fail just appeared on the screen with a delightful little sparkle trail, because the macro fail is a kind of unicorn. The simple pat explanation, the facile explanation, is a unicorn. It's magical, it's fake. It's not something you can deal with. Because how can you attack didn't want it bad enough? How can you attack the wrong idea? And the answer, of course, is that you can't. Because these things, these explanations are so vague, there's nothing you can do with them. You can't say, well, I had the wrong idea. Next time I'll have the right idea. Well, how? And don't say via 30 by 500 because that's certainly not a simple answer. So the trick then to turn failure into success, to commit alchemy, essentially, is to isolate a macro fail and to attack it. Here are some examples of little micro fails that I see regularly in this class. People say, oh, they don't like videos, or, oh, they don't like reading, so they'll skip lessons. They say to themselves, I'll remember that when they read a lesson or watch a lesson or read a book. Not true, by the way. They think to themselves, I already know this. I don't need to complete this lesson. I don't need to do this homework. It's clear to me. It's obvious. When the time comes, I will know how to implement it. You won't. Ooh, that's a great idea. We'll spend a lot of time on this particular micro fail. And finally, this doesn't apply to me. I said a lot. Outside of class, or after class, among people I know who are trying to create products, trying to create startups, I see these micro fails all the time. I can't ship. It's not done. I'll write that sales page later. I have to have this feature or else no one will switch to me from the competitor. I can't email my customers. That would be spam. And of course, this doesn't apply to me. It's one of my favorites. Now, you might think to yourself, well, sometimes I procrastinate. Maybe I will write that sales page later. But if I say that, I might actually do it later because I'm that kind of person. Well, the occasional fail is completely normal and acceptable. We all fall down sometimes. The question is it systemic? Do you say to yourself, I'll write that sales page later every day of every week? Then it becomes a problem. Because if you commit a micro fail once, you're fine. Twice, you're okay. Third time, it's a habit. Even Shakespeare knew this when he wrote, How use doth breed a habit in a man. That is where habits come from. Repetition. So there's no such thing as a failure. When you look at the big picture, there's actually only accretion of failure. Tiny failure layers accreting, piling up like a pearl in the mouth of an oyster. The question is why? Why fail day in, day out? Why do we do this to ourselves? And of course, the answer must be the power of habit. This quote blew my mind, and I hope that it blows yours too. It's worth revisiting over and over. One paper published by a Duke University researcher in 2006 found that more than 40% of the actions people performed each day weren't actual decisions, but habits. 40%, guys, more than 40%. Not decisions, but habits, things they did almost automatically. In other words, failure is composed of habits, not of choice, but of circumstance. When you look at failing in a small way, in a tiny way, not emailing your customers, for example, or not taking notes on your lessons every day for weeks. If only 40% is a habit, and what if you could take that 40% and make it conscious and then turn it to win? You would be 40% closer to truly awesome. And honestly, I think if you can get something right 40% of the time, you can absolutely run a profitable business. So how can we start to actually take this process, take what we know now about failure and habits, and turn it around for the good? Well, first, another neuroscience fact. I'm going to show you a set of numbers in a moment, and I want you to memorize it. You have 2.5 seconds. All right, it's gone. Pretty much impossible, right? Unless you have a real flair for numbers. I certainly don't. But what if I told you this was the sequence broken up into tiny pieces? Suddenly it starts to look a lot easier to remember, doesn't it? Because they're not just numbers in a string, they're chunks, and each chunk has meaning. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, 52 weeks, and 365 days in a year. Now you can remember this number all day long, and it only took a moment to explain it in a way that your brain would happily file away. Now all you have to remember is that it starts with seconds and it ends with days in a year. That's all you have to remember. That's the magic of chunking. Your brain is not meant to think, and it's not meant to remember infinite, discrete amounts of information. What it does is it looks for meaning and sense, and then it takes those and turns them into what we call chunks. For example, chunking of habits. When you walk in the door at night, do you consciously think about every single thing that you do? Do you walk up to your door, count the steps, carefully think, I'm going to put my hands in my pocket right now and take out my keys, and so on and so forth? When you get up in the morning, how conscious do you have to be to make it to the toilet? So if we think about chunking, we think about microfails, we think about accretion of failure. We think, well, if I can identify these tiny bits, these tiny chunks that make up this whole big fail, maybe I can turn them into success. And that's what your homework is for today, is to take a step towards the cure, towards replacing at least 40% of your bad habits with great ones. Your first step, naturally, as we said earlier, is to isolate microfails. In other words, you want to take your failure routines and de-chunk them, turn them into tiny bits. They've been turned into sets of automatic behaviors, and you want to take them and break them down into their tiny, discrete bits. Each part carefully considered instead of automated. The next step will be then to attack those tiny chunks or replace them with new habits. We're only going to do step 1 today. So, your homework will be to look at some of the habits that you have, some of the routines you have, and turn them into tiny step-by-step instructions. Simply think about what you're doing when you walk in the door. What do you do when you get up in the morning? Seriously simple, step by step. What do you do when you sit down at the computer for the first time in a day? Now, if you isolate all the tiny bits in these routines, you'll be creating a practice and a habit for understanding what it is you do automatically without even knowing it all day, every day, in work, in business, and in your relationships. And then we're going to take the business product ones and turn them into good habits. That'll be the next lesson. But if you do this homework, you'll be well on your way to building habits of choice instead of habits of circumstance.